This is a quick update video on how my week 1 went, what changes I made to the build, and how I farmed around 1 million of currency. The start was a bit rougher than expected since blood notch prices were pretty high early on. I started day 1 as a fairly standard Righteous Fire build to complete my Atlas and grab 4 White Stones. The only real change was adding a Foulborn Red Dream since it was pretty cheap and gave me a nice bit of max life. On day 2 I made some changes to the build so I could already fit in Fulcrum. I would normally do the blood notch switch first for the incredible defense it provides, but blood notch prices were really high early on and Fulcrum was very cheap. I also bought a Hateful Accuser here, which I swapped in whenever I needed more boss damage in addition to the weapon swap setup from my League Start POB. On day 3 I made the final switch to the Fulcrum and blood notch setup. I was also able to craft some really nice rares because the essences for the helmet were very cheap, and with the Genesis tree I could craft some really good items for very cheap. On day 4 some pretty noticeable changes happened. I added the Defiance of Destiny amulet, which made me only die once for the rest of the week. This helped me reach level 100 at day 6. Since I switched away from Purity of Fire to Malevolence, I needed to compensate for the lost max res, which I did with the Jewel and the new ring base. Switching to Malevolence meant more damage and also allowed me to use the Watcher's Eye to gain bleed and poison immunity that way. I switched to a Stygian Vice to compensate for the lost chaos resistance and to add another jewel socket. This lets me use another shock avoidance jewel, which in combination with a timeless jewel made me fully shock immune. For crafts, I settled on a Tender Embrace craft to gain some life regeneration and endurance charge generation, with additional physical damage reduction and life, and a Heart of Flame craft with a lot of ignite chance. This is huge for us because it lets us easily cap our ignite chance. On day 6 I made the switch to the Mageblood version to start the final version of the build. This brings us to my current version. I changed quite a lot here. There are tons of great jewels for this build, so I reworked the tree a good bit to fit more of them. This meant unspecking a lot of otherwise good nodes. For example, I dropped the stun cluster for more recovery and the crit immunity. To compensate I got a 60% blood notch, and I used a crit reduction Cloak of Flame, the Armor Mastery, and 4 tattoos to make me crit immune. Speaking of immunities, this build managed to stack a pretty crazy amount of defense and avoidance. It's immune to crits, poison, bleed, corrupted blood, curses, reflect, shock, freeze, chill, and is unaffected by ignites. We also use a massive Thread of Hope, which lets us efficiently allocate more nodes around our Timeless Jewel to pick up some really strong ones. This build is an absolute blast to play. The clear speed and high density content like stack deck farming on Toxic Source is amazing. It's very comfortable to play as a zero button build in Ultimatums and Simulacrums. I ran over 50 Simulacrums without dying once. On the higher budgets you can also fully AFK the high Fortress encounters. The single target damage in later versions despite the loss of Val Breach is better than expected. It's more than enough for normal content like regular bosses or T17 bosses. And I also tried an Uber Extract with my final version, which was pretty easy. As for how I made my currency, on day 1 and 2 I focused on progressing my Atlas. After that I used an Ultimatum and Expedition tree to farm up enough currency to buy Fulcrum and Blood Notch. Starting around day 3 and 4 I switched to a map farming Atlas to farm some 8-mod Toxic Soul maps to prepare for stack deck farming. Doing stack deck farming combined with Simulacrums, once I got my Defiance of Destiny, was how I made the majority of my profit up until Mageblood. That's how my week 1 went. If you have any questions about the build, progression or farming strategies, feel free to leave them in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, feel free to like or subscribe the channel to stay updated for future videos. Enjoy the rest of the league, bye!